All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Sullivan, but you can call me Sully. Most people do. I'm a sound designer, sound editor, and composer for film, television, video games, live theater, theater entertainment, animation, anything that needs sound is pretty much what I'll be doing. So at the end, there will be questions and everything, so feel free to ask me about any of those areas. Thank you, first of all, for coming. And I want to really thank Molly Ferreira and Celine Schreier for allowing me to do this. I want to introduce myself and kind of give you a background of what I kind of do. So I'm going to show you a short demo reel. So in this is, the first thing you'll see is an animation redesign that I did when I was in high school. And then I'll show you a film I'm working on right now called Pizza Man, and then the last one is called Escaper.
Did someone say pizza?
Next thing I'm going to ask is, what makes a film sound great? Sorry about that. So, that's a very hefty question with a lot of different answers, I'm guessing. But, you know, the more we think about it, I think you can get it down to about 3 things. Does anyone have an idea of what those 3 things might be? Take answers? Yeah. Just
One thing probably had to be the music.
Okay. Yeah, correct.
Timing.
Okay. Maybe.
The quality of the sound.
Yes, maybe. Anyone else? Well, I think there's 3 things that you can get it down to. What make up, a film soundtrack, and what makes a film sound great and mesh together. And those 3 things are dialogue, music, and effects. So dialogue, including things like VO, which is voiceover, music, which is pretty self-explanatory, and then effects, things like hard effects, Foley, BGs, and sound design stuff, elements. I'll explain what those things mean later on. So, the first part of of a film soundtrack is dialogue. Now at the top there I have DIA or DX. The reason I wrote that is because when we're working in a session of sound, basically when we're putting sound to picture, we're going to name our tracks a certain thing. So we usually name them DIA or DX. I personally go DX, but it's honestly just a preference thing. So within dialogue, there's many different things, mainly three things. Production audio, which is the sound that is recorded while on set. And then we have dialogue editing, which is a process of cutting up the dialogue in order to make basically a cohesive sound to the dialogue. And then we have ADR and voiceover. I'll go into that as in another slide. So, first part, production sound. Now the first thing about production audio that you should always know is that you want good, clean, usable audio. And usually the standard crew for a production sound team on a professional set is about 3 people or 4 people. And that includes, first, the boom op, which you can see in the top right there. And then you'll have a production mixer, who is right here, which they'll either have basically a huge bag on with a bunch of stuff in it. Usually it is a recorder. Or you'll see basically a huge cart right here. That's if you're dealing with a ridiculous amount of things like lavalier microphones, multiple booms. And then the third and fourth is going to be what they call auxiliary or utility. Usually it goes utility and then auxiliary. Utility sound tech is basically someone that deals with things like putting the lavaliers on the actors, or gaffing down cables. Basically, honestly, kind of the grunt work. And then auxiliary basically gets the sound team coffee. So one thing I want to mention is wild sound. So wild sound is sound that is recorded on set, but not during shooting, not when the camera is rolling. So say we have we're working on a film, and this film has a huge car chase in it. Think of a movie like Baby Driver, right? Now, there is no way that the production audio person is going to be able to get really great, good, clean, usable audio from all those cars and everything, and how are you going to record all the sounds of the cars? So what you do is, as a production sound guy, you go, guy or gal, sorry, is you go to the driver, the stunt driver, and you're like, hey, you know what, I'll buy you a cup of coffee, and here's a nice croissant if you basically give me a bunch of takes that I can use. So what we'll do is, we'll do cars driving by. I'll do I'm in the back of the seat and I'm recording the car on the pavement. A bunch of stuff to get a library full of sounds so that I can then deliver that into post-production, so post-production sound editors can use that when they are basically cutting the film. So the equipment and tools usually on a production sound team, first thing first is a boom op. We'll be using boom pole. We're usually using headphones, maybe not headphones, depends on the person. And also, obviously, a shotgun microphone, which this is getting a little technical here, but in a cardioid polar pattern, it'll be a shotgun. I know 2 big shotgun microphones that are used consistently in film sets are the Sennheiser 416 and also the Rode NTG3. So that's what boom op will be using, and then a mixer will be using things like audio mixers, such as the mixer Sound Devices 722, and things like we'll be recording right into Pro Tools or whatever your audio recorder is, and it'll be mixing lavaliers and making sure everyone sounds good. And auxiliary will have gaff tape, a bunch of stuff that might need. So the next part is dialogue editing. Now, dialogue editing is not really about the words. It's basically editing everything so it sounds clean. But it's not about fixing all the words and everything like that, unless you have to. But it's much more about what we call fill. Fill is room tone. Room tone is the sound of the room. So when the performance is given, there is the sound of which the voice is heard in that room. And that is called fill, basically. You know, that the sound of the room. Sorry. Room tone. So it's much more about spreading the dirt all over, the dirt being fill, in order for everything to sound consistent from, cut to cut and, scene to scene. So it's much more about that. And it's about flow and rhythm. You have to be thinking as how the performer is giving the dialogue and everything like that. And it gets a little bit more technical when you have to cut between words. Say you have a very bad take, or there's one syllable that's just bad. For instance, there's a thing called sibilance. Sibilance is a really good word for what it is because it explains it in the word, saying the word, it explains what it is. Sibilance is the S's and the C's. They have this, bite to it. And so sometimes in recording, it can almost give the audio a bad, it can peak it, maybe distort it, and it can also just sound not very good. So you can cut in between words. But that gets very technical, and if you have any questions about that, that's a whole thing on itself, and I will explain that later on if you want to. Okay, so the next part is ADR and voiceover. So ADR stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement. So ADR is, say we have production audio that was recorded in next to a construction site. There is literally going to be no take that is probably going to be very usable. So what you do is you get your actors to come into the studio, and you will get the production sound. You'll have the production sound super dirty, but you'll hopefully be able to make out what the actor is saying. And what you do is you cue up for the actor what the words they're saying, and the actor will try to say back what they had said. So I'm going to show you a video right here. This is a wonderful video. It was going around Facebook for a while. But this is Hugh Jackman doing ADR for the movie Logan, in which there's a scene where he's running through the woods and he has to grunt and stuff like that. And of course, when we think about it, there would be no way to get really great audio from that if he had like a lav on, because it would be going all over the place. And with boom pole, you would have to be on like a truck or something. So I'm going to show you that real quick. Man, I love that video. Mainly because, as a sound guy, that is like the most ideal situation you want to be in, because that actor has literally put every single thing he's got into that performance, and you're going to get great audio from that. So ADR is really about getting the accurate sound. So what I mean by that is, in ADR, you will record with usually the same microphone that was used to record the on-set dialogue, so that when the dialogue editor goes in, that all the sound sounds consistent, because microphones have different, sounds to them. So you want everything to sound consistent, so you'll use maybe the same shotgun. As you can see in that video, they're using a shotgun and stuff like that, which wouldn't be typical in voice recording, but for this, you want to use what was used on set. So it's really about getting that accurate sound to make everything cohesive. Now voiceover, pretty self-explanatory, I think. Going into a studio and just recording over a certain film or animation. Now the next part, is music. So MX or MUS is what we'll usually name it in a session. I personally go with MX, but preference. So usually there's 3 people on this team, which would be a composer, a music supervisor, and a music editor. So the first things first, as a composer, what you should always be thinking about are, what are the goals of this film? So what you really want is, one thing that I do is when I'm composing for a film, I will go to the director right away and ask, give me the top 3 emotions of this film or given scene. And once I have those emotions of that scene or film, I get a better understanding of how I want things to sound. Do I want things to sound darker? So I'm going to put in put in dissonance and put in a minor key or something like that. And so it's all about the emotional context and tone. So the thing is let's think about John Williams here. John Williams composed Star Wars. He composed things like Jaws as well. He composed E.T., right? And Star Wars was going for this huge, expansive, space opera sound of just orchestra and just, this emotional, big aspect of everything, almost fantasy. And so that's what the emotional context was. That's what the tone was. But in difference from that, we have Trent Reznor, who composed The Social Network, which is a very electronic, brooding, almost sensitive side to the music in order to give for the film Social Network. And also, one thing I want to mention is keeping dynamic range in mind. So what I mean by this is dynamic range is, how bassy it is, how high pitched it is, and stuff like that, and just keeping your frequencies in check. Because the thing is you need effects and music to work with each other, and you don't want things to get muddy. So if you have a scene where you're, super bassy in the effects, and then the music is also super bassy, it's going to get very muddy. It's not going to sound good. So you need to talk to your music, supervisor and mainly the sound effect editors to understand, all right, I'm going to, put this up here in the, the upper range, and you put the effects down here in the lower range, so we work off of each other when you can cover this huge amount of dynamic range and give it a holistic kind of feel. So the next part is music supervision. Now, the music supervisor is basically a person who handles all music-related aspects of the film, and primarily licensing and legal aspects. They're basically the lawyer and the professional crate digger. I say professional crate digger because they are the person that, for instance, like a movie like Baby Driver, there was really actually no composition specifically made for the film. It was all already made music. So the music supervisor was the one to basically find that music for the film and license it and make sure that you're allowed to use it in the film. Now the next person is the music editor. Now the music editor will be editing and making the structure of the music soundtrack to complement the film and flow. So first things first, know the theory. As a music editor, you're the person that will be getting whatever the composer did and converting that in order to fit the picture. So, picture lock, which is when you finally have your film as it's going to be and there's no more changes to what frames are in there, adding more frames, that changes a lot, even when they tell you it's not going to change anymore. So the music editor's job is to make sure that fits. So if the composer says, oh, I'm composing from 0 to 1 minute and 15 seconds, but if you take out, 3 or 4 frames, that's going to mess up the flow of the music. So it's the music editor's job to make sure they can get that into that time frame of the film. Now the music editor first job is with temp music. So a good example with John Williams. John Williams, as I said in the last slide, or 2 slides ago, composed for Star Wars and E.T. and Indiana Jones. And so say I'm a director and I really want John Williams on my film. So what I'll do is get a rough cut of the film and have my music editor cut in previous compositions John Williams has done for other films to complement my film's rough cut, to get an idea of how that composer sounds in my film. So that's what they'll be handling usually early on. And the music editor needs an incredibly strong sense of flow. So you have to have an understanding of, bars and beats and such like that, so you're not cutting in an awkward time. And the biggest thing is make friends with your film editor, because they are going to make your life hard. And that's very true. They will tell you, oh yeah, it's locked and everything like that, but they might change it again. Or, there's really fast cuts and, the music is going really fast and you have to cut it to each cut or something like that. So you have to basically be friends with the film editor so that it makes your life easier. And one thing I would say is futzing. I love that word. But futzing is putting the music to the picture. So, as I said here, like a radio playing. So you would futz it to sound like it was coming out of a radio. Now the next part is effects. So, as I shown here, FX or SFX is what we usually name them in the session. My personal preference that I do is actually, if I have monaural effects, which is just one channel, one singular channel, I will call that FX1. And then if I have stereo effects, which is left and right channel, I'll call that SFX, because stereo effects. But it's preference on what you name it. So there's four main things here: the hard effects, the sound design, Foley, and BGs. So the person that handles the effects mainly is what we call the supervising sound editor, which is really what I focus on when I do film. And that person handles all the main sound editing, but also handles the DME, which, as we said, is dialogue, music, and effects editors. They handle the dialogue editor, music editor, and sound effects editor, all their work, and puts it together later on, and it gives it to the mixer in the final process. But we'll talk about that. And they basically have the overall artistic and creative vision for the film and how they want it to sound. So the first part is hard effects. So hard effects are common sounds found in the picture. So things like doors, gunshots, cars, basically the realistic sounds. Now the thing is this line is always blurred with Foley, because something like a door might be covered in Foley. I'll explain what Foley is, but okay, quickly. Foley is object movement. For instance, I have a bag on. So if I have a bag on, if I'm the actor and I have a bag on in the picture, later on the Foley stage, I'll put that in because, to give it a good recording. But this line can get blurred a lot because, some things will be covered by the effects, something will be covered by the Foley. And usually what you can do later on is layering. And look, that's the next point. So layering is basically putting effects on each other in order to create a holistic, great sound. So something like a wooden door. So we have the sound of a wooden door, opening and closing, right? But say, this is an old wooden door. So I want a little bit of a door rattle. So when you open it, there's like, squeaky hinge maybe. And the door handle, sounds a bit rusty or cold, And so you'll put that in and you'll layer those effects on top of each other to do it. Now one thing is that a mixer is a person who puts basically all of these sounds together and basically levels it out, makes sure if it's high or loud or whatever. They'll actually do some of this. So for instance, I have a good mixing friend, and what he would do a lot was with doors. If there was a glass door, he had this one specific sound effect he would always really like, which was a slight glass pane wiggling. And so when someone closed a glass door, he would like to put that in, stuff like that. So some things can be covered by other people's jobs. So the person that handles the hard effects is the sound editor or sound editors. Usually it'll be multiple people, or one or two. And if you have about two people, what you can usually do is, depending on how long the film is, you can break it up, or you can have one person focus on sound effects, the hard effects, and another person focus on the BGs. Now, one thing you'll do, if you have the budget to do it, is what we call field recording. Now, field recording is basically going out into the world and in order to record and capture sounds that would be utilized later on. Now, as I said, this is basically wild sound. But if you have the budget to do it, you can go out and record for yourself. A lot of people do that. A lot of sound editors do that. And one thing I want to mention is usually you're working in mono most of the time. So monaural is, so let's talk about stereo versus binaural. So stereo is left and right. So we have two speakers up here, correct? So one is, left, one is right. Yeah. And, well, it's opposite. But, so we have two different channels that audio can come out of. But with monaural, we have one. Basically, think about stereo being summed down to one channel. So it's left and right. It's not left and right. Kind of tricky, but usually you're working in mono most of the time because you don't really need to use stereo effects. It can clutter things up because there'll be more frequency in things and it'll clutter it up. But that being said, utilize stereo effects because some things need to be in stereo. For instance, cars passing by. You can't have a good car passing by because in mono, because it'll be like, ooh. It'll just be like, it'll be dumb. Because the thing is, most of the time is, if you have a stereo mic, like this, right? One microphone's here, one microphone's here. You're going to get a sound recording of this coming over, and then this mic is going to pick it up and go out. So that would be a point where you need a stereo effect. Now, the next part is sound design. These are some of the posters and films that I consider to have like absolutely exceptional, amazing sound design. And sound design is the creation, manipulation, and recording of custom sounds. So think things like specialty effects, like dinosaurs, aliens, robots, advanced technology, guns. And usually it's unorthodox, emotional, and creative thinking. It's really out of this bounds kind of thinking about things and how you want it to sound. A sound designer will take the sound of, say, saltine crackers and then turn that into an alien voice or something like that. It's a different way of listening to the world. It's the experimental realm of things. So you'll be thinking about things and have an understanding deeply of how sound works. You'll understand things like sound synthesis, of literally how sounds are produced in the world, how you can create sounds, specifically with electronic instruments, and just how you can manipulate this unseen thing in order for your own benefit. So some of the tools that we use are pitch shifting, time shifting, layering, and DSP. DSP stands for digital signal processing. So pitch shifting would be changing the pitch of something. Time shifting will be basically shifting how long the effect is played or how short the effect is played. We have layering, as I explained later on in before with sound editing. And DSP. DSP stands for digital signal processing, and that is putting things like through things like phasers, flangers, reverbs, which all kind of have these specialty effects You don't really need to know exactly what all these things is. Reverb, I mean, that's kind of important. That is basically the space of something. But anyways, so really nowadays, sound design is an umbrella term for all sound jobs. So a lot in films, where it's like a short film, you'll see like one person. You'll usually see sound designer, and that will be just one person. But that sound designer also did things like the Foley, the dialogue editing, the music editing. So they are a sound designer nowadays is basically doing everything. But in big budget films, that term of creating specialty effects and doing really unorthodox things is still kind of applies. So the next part, Foley. So as we see here, we call it FOL or FLY. I personally choose FOL. This is what you'll usually choose when you're obviously naming tracks. So it's movement-based sounds. And there's 3 categories of Foley, which is cloth, footsteps, and object movement. So we'll have things like cloth, footsteps, and objects. And it's a very unorthodox, special way of thinking. A lot of the Foley artists that I know think in a completely different way and are highly acute at hearing things that we won't usually hear. I had a Foley artist that I constantly work with, and I was working with him one time, and we were recording a thing, and I was like, man, I really need like a really nice, chair squeaking. And he was like, oh wait, I'll be right back. And he literally went down to another school building. He took like the 5th chair from like a classroom and brought that back. And he was like, yeah, listen to this, it has a great chair. Like he knew exactly that chair sounded great, and he wanted to bring it in. So it's a really interesting way of hearing things and knowing what to do. And really, you're an actor. And that's going to be explained with this video right here. This is a great video. It's from the 70s. And it's basically explaining what Foley artists are doing. There's 2 Foley artists here, and they're acting to picture. Wow! Okay. So let me just skip in here a little bit.
Rate or replace sounds.
copyright there. I love that video. But yeah, so you could get a good understanding of what they're doing to a picture. Yeah, wonderful sync. And so there's usually what we in Foley a Foley editor, which was also called a Foley mixer, person that will record the Foley that the Foley artists will perform. As we saw, these are the two Foley artists right here. But there'll usually be a person recording all their takes, and they will spot what needs to be Foleyed. Spotting is basically going through a film and noticing basically what you have to add and do. So as a Foley editor, I would go through a film and say, all right, this guy's running through a park, so I'm going to need footsteps of him running through a park. And I'll make a timeline. I'll make like a clip, an empty clip, and then later on, when we go back into the film, the Foley artists will then do with the clip, and that clip will get filled with the sound, and there we go. And flow and performance is key. Synchronization is not as important. So the thing is that the Foley editor, that's going to be the one that really syncs up everything, but it's really not about that. It's not the Foley artist's job to be perfectly on sync. It's much more about the flow and performance. How heavy the punch was, how soft his footsteps are. What he sounds like when he walks. Does he drag his foot? And it's much more about that than it is perfectly getting it on time. Now, the last part of effects is BGs, or backgrounds. So, usually if you have a big enough project, you may have a background or ambience editor, but usually most of the time it's handled by the sound effects editor. And ambiences, or backgrounds, are things like forests, like a forest sound, a factory, a residential area, and room tone. Room tone, as I said, is the sound of the room. And it's really about the space. It's organic and real. Now, let me not confuse you with that, because you have something like Star Wars, where it's completely fantasy, sci-fi, and you're creating this world that isn't real. But so why do you want it to sound organic and real? Well, that's the thing. Skywalker's sound, which is the guys who basically did all the sound for Star Wars, their whole motto is make it sound organic. They want everything to sound as if it should be there. Like in Star Wars, everything sounds like it should be in that world. And that's the whole point of it. Now, usually in backgrounds, you'll be working in stereo or surround. So stereo, left and right, or surrounds, which will be, left, right, center, back, side, all, basically speakers all around you. And it's an overall mold to what effects, Foley, and dialogue will stick into. It's what everything will sit on and basically make everything sound great. Reverb, which is usually done in digital signal processing, which is the sound of the room. So say I have a reverb software that I put a sound effect through, and I have this reverb set to a cathedral. It's going to sound like it's in a cathedral in this space of how long it takes the sound to die off. It's going to sound like that. And that's kind of like, honestly, adding reverb to effects is kind of what we call the magic, the little fairy dust of sound, because it honestly makes everything sound better. If you have a terrible vocalist in recording music, I swear to you, add a little bit of reverb and they'll sound a lot better. So it's really, and that's what backgrounds are. It's the space of everything, and it's really where everything will sit on, and it's going to make it sound better. So once all that is done, once the music editor and once the dialogue editor, and the sound editors have done everything, the supervising sound editor will take it to the mixing stage. So the sound soup basically is going to give it to the re-recording mixer. The re-recording mixer is the person that will take the dialogue, music, and effects, DME, and mix them all together throughout the film so that they sound great. So they sound like a true film soundtrack. So the music is really loud at this point, or the dialogue is super quiet at this point. That's their job. Now, what they'll do when they first get all these things from the supervising sound editor, is make a thing called pre-dubs. Pre-dubs are very simply tracks with like effects in them. So things like, I'll make say I'm working on Saving Private Ryan, and I'm working on Saving Private Ryan, and I really want, I have a bunch of gunshots. So what I'll do is make a gunshot pre-dub, which is basically a track with just all the gunshots in them. So later on, when I'm going through my tracks in order to mix them, in my mixer, I'll have one fader devoted to just gunshots. So I can go in, do a pass of just the gunshots and how they sound, and I can basically, tweak it on how, loud or low it sounds. The thing about a mixer is that you have to think about what is the most important thing in the scene. For instance, I don't know if many of you have seen the movie Get Out. Wonderful movie. But in the movie, there is a very important part of the film where this character uses a teacup. And this teacup is used to basically hypnotize our main character. And so there's a scene where she's hypnotizing our main character, and that is the most important thing in the scene. That teacup is the most important thing in the scene. So you're going to mix that a little bit louder than it should be to give your attention to it. For instance, if I'm in a film, and say I put my keys down on the table, and it's a little bit louder than you think it should be, most likely the character putting down the keys on the table is important later on. It's really about what you need to tell throughout the volume. And you want a lot of time here. I call this the salon stage as a supervising sound editor. It's really where all those little minute details get finished. So as I said, like with the glass pane shaking when you close the door, that's when you'll do this usually. You want all those little details to make everything sound polished. Some quick tips. Dialogue should usually max out at about -6 dB. It should be the loudest thing in the soundtrack most of the time, but a lot of Hollywood movies don't use that. Usually, you have, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so you mentioned the max. What would be like the minimal? Like, what should it be around?
The minimum would probably be around -12. -12. But the thing is, there is no set standard on things. And so you have all these action movies with the dialogue being super low, and then the effects, the action, the explosions and everything are so loud that you just like have to constantly keep on adjusting, your remote. And another quick tip, the ear wants brightness and definition. It wants to hear things in clarity. And so that can be used to your advantage. If you want to muffle things, it can tell you something about where that sound is being played from, or what that sound is supposed to be. And I would say work in long chunks, not small chunks. If you have an entire scene that's, say, 2 minutes long, I recommend you work on that scene through its entirety, not through just going through about 30 seconds of each time. Work in long chunks, it'll get you done a lot faster. So, some special little things I want to talk about are just little theory that you can use. So one thing you want to do is always trick the audience. That's what our job a lot of the time is. Our job as sound people is to tell a story through sound. So you're going to use what is effective, sometimes not literal. So if, I have, for instance, a punch. A punch sounds, in real life, doesn't sound very interesting. But in movies, it sounds like kick-ass. It sounds great. So but they're not using an actual punch. They're using a mixture of things like lettuce. They're using a thing like, a chamois. They're using things like meat or, peanuts even. So always use something that just sounds effective, that will get you your emotional response that you want, not always literal. One thing is low end versus high end. So low end adds weight, mass. Low end is basically bass. So when we hear a cannon, we want that cannon to sound like huge. We want to hear that big blaze, that bass blast. And then another thing, high end. High end basically adds brightness, definition, and it makes something sound small, light, or cute. So if you have, say, a mouse, you want it to sound cute. And for instance, I have a mouse right here that I've used this multiple times in films and stuff like that as doing Foley. And so you want the mouse to sound cute, sound small and stuff like that. So that's what usually high end is. High end also adds this definition. So things like sibilants, the S's and C's, that's where they reside in the higher end of frequencies. And volume levels, sorry.
What was low end?
Low end is basically the bass. It's the oomph of everything. It's honestly the balls of everything. It's like the, like the, I don't know. It's just, when we hear that kick drum, we want to hear that nice kick drum. Yeah, it's the girth of the sound. Yeah, exactly. And another thing, volume levels. So if you have, usually volume levels tell you about distance and also how important something is. So if I have a radio, if I have music, in the scene playing, and it sounds really, really low, it's probably the radio's far away. Or, maybe there's cars in the background, and they sound pretty off in the distance, because they're lower, they don't sound very loud. It means it's saying that those cars are far away. If it's higher, it sounds like it's right in front of you, it's very important to you. So you can play with that in the mixing stage. Now, another thing I want to talk about is guided perception. Now, guided perception is using sound to guide the understanding of something. So one thing that we like to do as a kind of example of guided perception is take any random picture you can think of on Google, download it, put it into your digital audio workstation or DAW, and put 3 different, very wild different sounds to it, and it will evoke a different response for things. So I did one here, and I'm going to show you this. So the idea is basically just to tell you what's going on in the picture or what might be going on in the picture using sound and how it gets your attention. So, hopefully you got 3 different emotions from that. Obviously the first one being kind of pretty realistic. Your church, maybe church just got let out. There's people talking. And then the second one was like, wow, maybe there's some satanic stuff going on. What is going on? It makes you feel uncomfortable. And then the third one is, oh, it's nice and pleasant. The sun is rising. Oh, the beautiful music. It's nice and pleasant. And I can guide your emotions for things and how you understand what this picture is through sound. And that's really, at the end of the day, what our job is, to tell a story through sound. So one thing I'm going to talk about is creatively using sound. So one aspect of this is subjectivity, which is using sound to focus in on a character's experience. The best, a really good example of this is from Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks' character in the Normandy beach landing, which I actually have right here. So right about here, you'll basically start to hear everything as he is hearing it. Right here. So, with the marrying of visuals and the marrying of sound, we got to understand what he hearing and how he's interpreting everything. And that's using subjectivity. Now, one thing I want to talk about that's pretty up in the air a little bit is rhythm, flow, and the musical qualities of sound. So, effects are like music. There is rhythm, flow, and harmonic content in sound. I would say that effects in music have really no difference. And this really comes out of a theory or that a 20th century composer by the name of John Cage, who was an avant-garde composer, kind of wanted to put attention to. And he specifically did this in one piece, what he called the water walk, which is basically taking objects that all have to do something with water and playing them through time. And I'll explain this, what this kind of meant and what he was trying to prove after this. This is him actually
Water
beforehand.
walk because it contains water and because I walked during its performance.
That's figures, doesn't it? Now also two things I want you to notice. Over here Mr. Cage has a tape recording machine which will provide much of the, when you touch the machine so that
So
you
I'm
know
gonna
where it
skip ahead
is, which
to
will
the
provide
actual
much of the back water walk.
So, yeah, the guy, and you're probably thinking, wow, this guy's a little crazy. But that's not, the point is, it's not supposed to be incredibly enjoyable music. The point is that what is music but just sound, just, notes and tones in a timed manner. And that's no difference from effects, from sound effects. Sound effects are just effects timed and put into a flow and have musical qualities that in a timed manner. So music and sound effects are basically the same thing. And this idea is kind of at the forefront of what we teach in schools in sound design wise. This is what where I go to, which is the Savannah College of Art and Design. I'm pursuing a BFA in sound design, and this is really what we kind of hold as the forefront of everything. That effects and music are similar, and they should have these components of flow and rhythm and stuff like that. So always be thinking about what something means to someone. Let me allude onto this a little bit more. So there's a good example of a sound designer named Eric Adol. He did things like Transformers. What else did he do? He did a lot of. He did Godzilla. He did a lot of interesting sound design stuff. But he was working on this film called The Tree of Life, and there was a point in The Tree of Life where there's a shot of a meteor hitting Earth, and they were like, "How are we going to give this sound?" So what he did is went into a mic and literally just breathed into it, and processed it later on, and it sounded great. And the director loved it. He absolutely loved it. And then he asked him, "All right, what did you use to do that?" And Eric said, "Oh, I just breathed into a mic." And then the director's, magic was gone. So the thing is we're kind of like magicians in a way, in that maybe always think about what something means to someone. How we can use that to allude on to other things. Don't always give away your magic, because maybe the magic will be lost then. So most of the time, simplicity is better. When layering and stuff like that, if you have like 20 layers, do you really need 20 layers? What can you get away with that gives you the same emotional response if it was 4 layers? So always use simplicity, because it allows you to hear things better and get all those details. So some extra little creative tips and ideas. I just want to talk about diegetic sound and non-diegetic sound. I just want to talk about this. Not because, honestly, sound people don't really use this most of the time, but film editors love the word and love using it, and they feel like, oh my god, look, I know a lot about sound because I know diegetic and non-diegetic stuff like that. And it's just, it's funny to play with that. But diegetic sound is basically sound that has a source on screen. So something has a radio playing, and you can see that radio. Non-diegetic sound is things like underscore, the sound or music that the character in the film cannot hear. Biggest thing is open your eyes and close your open your ears and close your eyes. And one thing that I would highly suggest all of you to do is go outside, go sit somewhere for 5 minutes, close your eyes, and just listen. Listen to what you're hearing. What are those two people talking about, maybe? Is there cars in the distance? Is there birds out today? What are the little things that you're hearing, and how do they tell you about where you are? Always just practice that, because listening is given to us biologically, but it's a skill. It really is a skill that you have to learn. There's ear listening and stuff like that. Just knowing how to hear things will really change your perception on a lot of things. And don't work until picture lock. Don't work until the final cut of a film is done, because you're going to have to do a lot of work later on if you just work on a rough cut, because things are still changing. Scenes are being added and taken. So if I put a whole soundtrack, my whole soundtrack to a rough cut, but they're like, oh yeah, here's the final cut, and the final cut's like 8 minutes longer, all that sound that you just put in, you're going to have to resync or like completely redo. And that's going to take up days, and you're going to lose time. So don't work until you have picture lock. I highly suggest that. And just some quick business suggestions for putting yourself out there as a sound person, and even honestly just in the entertainment arts, is it's really about who you know, how you are as a person, and your reputation to others. Yes, it does matter of how great of work you do, But, I've just heard so many times of, people getting jobs because they knew someone else. Or, in Hollywood, what they'll sometimes do is literally sit down with the supervising sound editor and the producer, and they'll go through resumes and be like, blah, blah, blah. They'll be like, oh, and the sound editor or someone will say, oh, yeah, love him, like, worked with him before. Or, no, I heard him, he was bad or anything like that. If they say anything negative or just like, I don't really, know him, they won't even look at the resume. But if they've heard of you, or maybe they worked with you, or if you have a good reputation as a person, they'll definitely look at your, resume or demo reel. It's really about how you are as a person, how you come off to other people. And they want to see passion, eagerness, proactivity, and experience. They want to see you know what you're talking about, you absolutely love what you're doing, and you'll put in the time. And give someone a definite answer on what you want to do. This is an interesting point that I took from a sound editor that gave a masterclass. He was like, when you meet someone, and they ask you, oh yeah, what do you want to do? And you're like, oh, well, I'm kind of interested in like this and this. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear that you're definite. They want to hear that you know exactly what you want to do. Not even if you don't know what you want to do, just say yeah, I want to do this. Like, I want to edit, for sports. I want to do this and this. Because they know you're out to get something specific. And that's just all, it gives you a nice reputation of things, that you know exactly what you want. Mixers, if you want to be an audio mixer, and I would say learn everything else. I've heard that so many times from professionals, that you're going to have to basically fix and do all those other things that editors would have to do. You'll have to put in sound effects. You might have to cut dialogue before. You might have to cut music. So learn everything else, not just mixing. Sound designers and editors, learn advanced synthesis. So learn to listen incredibly deeply. You want to be that guy that when you're out with friends and you hear something and you're like, oh wow, hey, you hear that? That sounded awesome. That sounded great. You want to be that guy because you're listening. You're attentively listening to things. And as I said, take a recorder out in the world with you and just record with it. It honestly will change your perception on things. If you just go out to a park, press record on your iPhone, right? And then record for 5 minutes and then listen back. It gives you a whole different perception of hearing things and really listening onto things. Study, study, study. Films, games, theme parks, and theater. There is the quote that I think it's like basically great artists steal and good artists steal and great artists copy and stuff like that. The thing is that I have gotten so many of my ideas and stuff like that from of being like, oh wow, I did that in that film and stuff like that. So study things and really, really listen to them. Internships and jobs, I would say bug them until they give you an answer. Don't be an asshole, but bug them until you hear something back. That is definitely a thing. Be persistent. Constantly send emails and saying, hey, get your foot in the door. That's what you want. And don't just send email and hope that you're going to get a response back, because you might not. So send 1,000 emails until they tell you either to please stop emailing us or yeah, let's talk. Brand yourself. Really have a definitive brand of who you are as a person, of why I should listen to your work, and what makes you special from other sound designers or other editors or other cinematographers. 14. But what I would do now is actually do a Foley and sound design demo. Add some. I'm gonna add a little bit of there's something in the road, or I'm walking on something that has a real gravel surface. Oh, here. Actually, sorry to do this to you. Instead of instead of just. So, I mean, it's like shrunk on here. All right. So. All right, so let's stop. So what's the thing that, what do you think the reason I stopped for?
Tinfoil.
Yeah, the tinfoil. The tinfoil is giving way too much thing. So let's take the tinfoil out of there.
What about putting it under the wax?
Actually, you see that cloth? Yeah, let's put that cloth underneath.
Why'd you hold back so much? I don't know. There's only one little jab. Wow, look at that. Alright, so we'll do a little more sauce.
How about that? Alright. You get a really nice quick punch. You know, like a nice quick punch. Alright, ready?
Let's go, Dom. Show us what you're made of.
Ooh.
Go. Alright. Let's have someone else try.
I beat the crap out of that. So get healthy food. Give me fries and nuggets. You will grow another life. I will devour them.
Here, let's move the mic a little bit closer. Also, one thing I want to mention is I'm using a pretty normal, what we call the workhorse mic, the SM58. You wouldn't usually use this for Foley, but I use this specifically because I just want to show you don't need a specially mic in a record Foley. You can use, basically, this is like a $99 microphone. You can just use that and you'll get great results. So, all right.